The room smelled like freshly cooked soup, and everyone thought the night would end with laughter. No one imagined it would end with screaming. I walked into that house with a small gift in my hands and respect in my heart. It was a family dinner, one of those gatherings you attend not because you're excited, but because you believe family still means something. My son hugged me quickly, distracted. His wife smiled politely, and her mother, she barely nodded. The table was already set. Steam rose from the bowls like a warning I didn't understand yet. People chatted about work, rising prices, and how quickly children grow up. I listened more than I spoke. I always did. I had learned long ago that silence keeps peace, at least for a while. But I could feel her watching me. Every time I moved my spoon, every time I spoke to my son, her eyes followed. There was judgment in them, cold and sharp. Then came the comments, soft, measured, hidden inside fake smiles. Some parents interfere too much. Some people don't know boundaries. I pretended not to hear. I focused on my soup. I reminded myself, don't ruin the evening. Don't embarrass your son. That's when the chair scraped loudly against the floor. The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. I looked up just in time to see her standing, her hand gripping the bowl. The steam hit my face before the pain did. In that moment, time broke. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was humiliation served hot, in front of everyone I loved. And as the soup burned my skin, I realized something terrifying. Family dinners can become nightmares when respect disappears. The pain wasn't the worst part. It was the silence. For a moment after the soup hit my face, no one moved. No one spoke. The room felt frozen, like everyone was waiting to see what I would do, as if my reaction would decide what kind of person I was allowed to be. My skin burned, but my chest felt heavier. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven. I reached for a napkin with shaking hands, trying to wipe away the humiliation before it settled too deep. The smell of soup clung to me, thick and unmistakable. She stood there, the empty bowl still in her hand. No apology, no shock, no regret. Just a look that said she had finally said what she'd been holding back for years. My son stood up halfway, then sat back down. His wife stared at the table. Someone whispered my name, but no one came closer. That hurt more than the burn, because in that moment, I realized cruelty doesn't always come from the act. It comes from the people who watch and choose comfort over courage. I had come with respect. I had spoken softly. I had swallowed every insult to keep peace in that room. And still, I was treated like I deserved this. She broke the silence with a laugh, a small one, almost proud. Now maybe you'll learn boundaries. That's when something shifted inside me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't screaming. I was clear. This wasn't about soup. This was about power, and she believed she had it. I stood up slowly, my clothes stained, my face burning, my dignity bruised but not broken. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her back. I looked around that table at my son, at the people who called this family, and understood something painful. Respect given does not guarantee respect returned. But silence? Silence teaches people how far they can go. And I was done teaching that lesson. It didn't happen all at once. The shock came first, then the pain, and finally, the understanding. As I stood there, my hands trembling, the room slowly came back into focus. The steam faded, but the sting on my skin didn't. Every second felt longer than the last, like time itself wanted me to sit with what had just happened. Someone finally rushed to get towels. Another voice said I should run cold water on my face. Their words sounded distant, hollow, like they were trying to fix a mess instead of admitting it never should have happened. She had already sat back down. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't anger that slipped. It was intentional, planned in quiet moments and bitter thoughts. The soup was just the excuse. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. I could see the war inside him, between the woman who raised him and the family he chose. And I hated that I had been made the battlefield. I walked to the sink, water splashing against my burning skin. I watched the soup swirl away, but the humiliation stayed. In the reflection, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked weak, but because I looked awake. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent, all the times I had apologized just to keep peace, all the moments I had shrunk myself so others could feel powerful. And standing there, dripping water onto the floor. I made a promise. Never again. Not to her. Not to anyone. I turned off the tap and dried my face slowly. When I returned to the room, something had changed, not in them, but in me. The soup had burned my skin, but it burned away my fear. And in that moment, I realized something life-changing. Some people only respect you when they see you're no longer afraid to walk away. I didn't say goodbye when I left the house. I didn't need to. The night air felt colder than it should have, or maybe my skin was still burning. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity. Something inside me had settled, like a decision finally made after years of hesitation. They thought it was over. They thought humiliation was the end of the story. I pulled out my phone. For years, I had avoided this call. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be that person who escalates things. But respect has a breaking point, and tonight, it had been crossed in front of witnesses. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm voice answered. I didn't cry. I didn't exaggerate. I told the truth. Every word, every detail, where it happened, who was there, what was done to me. And as I spoke, my hands stopped shaking. On the other end of the line, the tone changed. Questions were asked. Notes were taken. I was told to document everything. Photos, times, names. What I thought was just family drama was suddenly being treated for what it really was: assault. I ended the call and sat back, staring at the windshield. For the first time that night, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because revenge was coming, but because silence was finally gone. Inside that house, they were probably still sitting at the table, maybe laughing, maybe justifying what happened, maybe telling my son it wasn't a big deal. They had no idea that one phone call had shifted the balance, quietly, legally, permanently. And for the first time, the power they thought they had was no longer theirs. The next morning, the burn on my skin had faded, but the memory hadn't. It sat with me as I drank my tea, quiet and heavy, like a truth that refused to be ignored. I looked at my phone, half expecting it to ring, half hoping it wouldn't. Then it did. The tone was different this time. Careful. Professional. I was told there would be follow-up questions, statements to be taken, that witnesses had already been named. What happened wasn't being brushed aside as a family misunderstanding. It was being taken seriously. By noon, my son called. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was shaken. He asked why things had gone this far. I told him the truth. This is how far it went the moment silence was mistaken for weakness. Later that day, messages started coming in. Apologies wrapped in excuses. Explanations that arrived far too late. She hadn't expected consequences. She hadn't expected me to step outside the family and speak to someone who wouldn't minimize what she did. She had expected me to endure. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror again. The redness was almost gone, but something else had changed. I stood straighter. I looked at myself without shame. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was peace, the kind that comes when you finally choose yourself after years of choosing quiet. I didn't destroy a family. I protected myself. And if anyone learned a lesson that day, it wasn't just her. It was everyone who believed I would stay silent no matter how far they pushed. She never expected my next move, but she'll never forget it. Weeks passed, but the impact of that night never faded. Not because of the pain, but because of what it revealed. People often think strength looks loud, like shouting, like revenge, like winning an argument in front of witnesses. But real strength is quieter. It shows up when you refuse to be erased, when you choose dignity over fear. The family dynamic changed after that. Conversations became careful. Words were measured. The woman who once looked at me with certainty now avoided my gaze. Not because she felt sorry, but because she understood something she hadn't before. There are boundaries you cannot cross without consequence. My son and I really talked for the first time in years. Not as parent and child, but as two adults facing an uncomfortable truth. I told him I loved him. I also told him love does not mean accepting abuse. He listened. That was new. I didn't ask anyone to take sides. I didn't demand loyalty. I simply stood firm in my truth. And slowly, That truth reshaped the room I had once been humiliated in. What surprised me most wasn't how others reacted. It was how I changed. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. I stopped confusing peace with silence. That night with the soup didn't break me. It woke me up. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. People will only treat you as poorly as you allow them to. The moment you choose yourself, everything shifts. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards. And that, more than any phone call, more than any consequence, is what truly changed everything.